negotiations with the IMF on track, given that Pakistan is positioning itself to get the next IMF program. The second point which SDPI's first response makes is that the authorities, which is the government of Pakistan, has ensured that the impact of high inflation, particularly on the low-income group, should be mitigated. Keeping this in view, the government has expanded its budget on social protection, pro-poor expenditure, as well as initiatives which could create infrastructure-related jobs. The third message which the first response document makes is that the government is trying to undertake some structural reforms, which may be painful in the short term. These reforms most notably are in the taxation space, where we have seen that this time around, the tax preference which was given to the exporting sectors and various other sectors, particularly on the import side as well, those have been withdrawn. Standard tax rate has been applied to several items which were previously being taxed at a preferential rate. This actually means that the government is now coming close to that concept that all incomes should be treated equally for taxation purposes. May they be export incomes, may they be agriculture incomes, real estate incomes, retail incomes. We are not there yet, but the government is trying to maintain that direction where it comes closer to taxing all incomes fairly, of course, keeping a threshold level for all incomes where poor are protected. But we'll take forward this discussion, and I can see that we have a large number of SDPI faculty over here who will make their own interventions from the floor, as well as online as well. So with this, let me first go to our first panelist. And of course, these panelists are here by way of to trigger the initial discussion. So we'll be happy to make this an inclusive talk. So let me first start with Dr. Khalid Waleed. Message aa gaya? Okay. So we have a recording from Dr. Abid Suleri, and we'll start from that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today to discuss Pakistan's federal budget 24-25 that was presented yesterday. बजट बनाना पाकिस्तान में कभी भी कोई आसान काम नहीं होता। उसमें जो एक हिस्टोरिकली किया जाता आमदनी जो है उसको बढ़ा के दिखाते थे, जो अखराजात था उनको थोड़ा सा कम करके दिखाया जाता था और कोशिश की जाती थी कि वो जो अगर IMF के प्रोग्राम के तहत बजट बन रहा है तो जो फिस्कल डेफिसिट का टारगेट के साथ नेगोशिएट हुआ है उसके अंदर रहा जाए। लेकिन पिछले साल आपने देखा कि जो बजट स्पीच में पेश किया गया था बजट बुक्स में, उसको रिवाइज करना पड़ा तो उसमें कुछ असम्पशन जो थी वो इतनी अनरियलिस्टिक थी कि IMF ने उसको चैलेंज कर दिया। अच्छी चीज इस बजट में ये है कि जो नंबर्स हैं वो कुछ हद तक रियलिस्टिक है। ये पहली दफा मैं देख रहा हूँ बड़े अरसे के बाद कि आमदनी में प्रोविंशियल सरप्लस नहीं दिखाया गया, वरना हमेशा एक इमेजिनरी नंबर प्रोविंशियल सरप्लस के तौर पर दिखाया जाता है। इसी तरह से प्राइवेटाइजेशन प्रोसीड के नाम पे एक जो खतीर रकम है वो दिखाई जाती थी। इस दफा प्राइवेटाइजेशन प्रोसीड के लिए $30 बिलियन रखे गए हैं और जो कोशिश है वो यही है हुकूमत की कि ये अपनी एक कमिटमेंट साबित करे इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म्स के लिए, ताकि जुलाई में IMF के साथ निगोशिएशन जो है वो आसान हो सके अगले पैकेज के लिए। अब इस मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक स्टेबिलिटी के लिए जाहिर है कि जो इक़दाम लिए जा रहे हैं उसके कुछ पॉजिटिव एस्पेक्ट हैं, कुछ उसके नेगेटिव एस्पेक्ट हैं। पहले पॉजिटिव एस्पेक्ट की बात कर लेते हैं। तो इसमें जो मैंने पहली चीज़ पिक की वो ये है कि जो सोशल प्रोटेक्शन सेक्टर है उसके लिए इनकम में इजाफा किया गया है। इस वक्त तकरीबन ये 600 अरब रुपए के लगभग सोशल प्रोटेक्शन वेरियर इनकम सपोर्ट प्रोग्राम के लिए रखे गए हैं। इसी तरीके से फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर बार बार इस अमर का अयादा करते रहे कि वो प्राइवेटाइजेशन जो है स्टेट ओन्ड एंटरप्राइजेस की, उसको वो परस्यू कर रहे होंगे और उसमें उन्होंने अपनी रिजॉल्व जो है वो दिखाई। जो मिनिमम वेजेस हैं उनमें इजाफा किया गया। इसी तरीके से गवर्नमेंट ने रजिस्ट किया जो जीएसटी एग्जम्पशन को मुकम्मल तौर पे विड्रॉ करना, स्पेशली सीड पे और मेडिसिन पे, पेंशन पे टैक्सेस को गवर्नमेंट ने इसमें रजिस्ट किया। गाड़ियों की रजिस्ट्रेशन जो है उसको इंजन साइज की बजाय गाड़ी की मालियत जो है उसके साथ मुंसलिक कर दिया गया। ये एक अच्छा इकदाम है। इसी तरह से सोलर एनर्जी के फ़रोग के लिए जो इनपुट आ रहा होगा सोलर एनर्जी को असेंबल करने के लिए, उसको एग्जम्पशन जो है वो दी गई हैं। और सबसे बढ़ के ये कि पेंशन रिफॉर्म्स का आगाज किया गया और जो न्यू एंट्रेंट है उनके लिए कंट्रीब्यूटरी पेंशन जो है उसको शुरू किया जा रहा होगा। ये तो कुछ पॉजिटिव चीज़ें थी, लेकिन इसके साथ कुछ इसके ड्रॉबैक्स और नेगेटिव चीज़ें भी हैं। और सबसे पहला जो ड्रॉबैक मुझे लगा वो पर्सनल इनकम टैक्स की जो स्लैब्स हैं उस पर शायद कुछ काम जो है वो किया जा सकता था, स्पेशली जो मिनिमम टैक्स एग्जम्पशन है। एक तरफ मिनिमम वेज जो है वो 37,000 रुपये रखी गई है और अगर आप उसमें से 13,001 रुपये ज़्यादा कमाते हो मिनिमम वेज से, तो उस एडिशनल 50,000 पर मंथ से जो भी एडिशनल होगा उस पर 5% टैक्स आप पे लग रहा होगा। तो ये जो एग्जम्पशन है इसको थोड़ा सा बेहतर बनाया जा सकता है। इसी तरह से ये बजट बनने के दौरान हम बार बार सुनते रहे कि रियल एस्टेट सेक्टर को, एग्रीकल्चर को और जो ट्रेडर्स हैं, रिटेलर्स हैं, उनको टैक्स नेट में लाया जाएगा। मुझे उसमें कोई खातर चीज़ जो है वो नज़र नहीं आई बजट में, स्पेशली रिटेलर को टैक्स नेट में लाने के लिए या एग्रीकल्चर से जो इनकम आती है अगर वो किसी थ्रेशोल्ड से ज़्यादा है तो उसको टैक्स नेट में लाने के लिए वो मुझे लग रहा है कि वहाँ पे एक लूप होल है। जो रियल स्टेट है वहाँ पे भी सिर्फ वो कैपिटल वैल्यू गेन जो है उसको तो टैक्स नेट में लाने की बात की गई है और फाइलर के, नॉन फाइलर के लिए एक ज़्यादा जो है उसमें प्यूनेटिव मेजर रखे गए हैं, लेकिन दिस इज नॉट इनफ इन तीनों सेक्टर्स को डॉक्यूमेंट करने के लिए या इनको टैक्स नेट में लाने के लिए। इसी तरीके से जो इसमें फर्टिलाइजर्स और पेस्टिसाइड्स हैं उन पे 10% जीएसटी आयद की गई है। पेट्रोलियम लेवी और डीजल लेवी, पेट्रोल और डीजल पे जो लेवी आयद होगी वो एक इंफ्लेशनरी इम्पैक्ट होगा उसका, और वो इम्पैक्ट करेगी वो जो सैलरीज में जो इजाफा किया गया है। ओवरऑल ये जो बजट है, जैसा कि मैंने कहा कि मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक स्टेबिलिटी हासिल करने के लिए ये डिज़ाइन किया गया है, लेकिन इसकी सक्सेस जो है वो इस पर डिपेंड करती है कि इसके इन मेजर्स को कितना इम्प्लीमेंट किया जा सकता है। और अगर इसको इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं किया जा सकेगा तो फिर ये एक लूज लूज सिचुएशन बनेगी कि अवाम जो है वो तो सफ़र कर रहे होंगे इसके इन्फ्लेशनरी इम्पैक्ट से, लेकिन शायद जो IMF है वो डू मोर का मुतालबा इसमें कर रहा हो। इसमें जो एक फाइनल चीज़ मैं कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि जो एक रिस्ट्रिक्टेड फ्रेमवर्क जिसमें जो बजट बनता है, सूबों को NFC अवार्ड के तहत उनका हिस्सा देने के बाद गवर्नमेंट के पास टोटल कुछ 10.3 ट्रिलियन रुपीज जो हैं वो बचते हैं और उसमें से 7.75 ट्रिलियन जो हैं वो तो सूद की अदायगी में चले जाएंगे, 2.1 ट्रिलियन जो हैं वो डिफेंस सर्विसेज में चले जाएंगे, 1 ट्रिलियन जो है वो पेंशन की अदायगी में चला जाएगा, 0.8 ट्रिलियन जो है वो तनख्वाहों के लिए चला जाएगा, और उसके बाद फिर आपके डेवलपमेंट और सब्सिडी और ग्रांट्स हैं। तो इन अदर वर्ड्स गवर्नमेंट को बारो करना पड़ेगा ना डिफेंस के लिए, डे टू डे एक्सपेंडिचर्स के लिए, पेंशन के लिए और बाकी तमाम चीज़ों के लिए, और ये विशेष साइकिल जो है ये चलता रहता है और इसी विशेष साइकिल की वजह से हम बार बार IMF के पास जाने में मजबूर होते हैं। तो थोड़ा सा हमें सोचना होगा कि हम किस तरीके से अपनी प्रोडक्टिविटी को बेहतर कर सकते हैं, किस तरीके से हम अपने जो इनकम है और रेवेन्यू उसको बेहतर कर सकते हैं, अखराजात को रैशनलाइज कर सकते हैं और सूबे इसमें क्या रोल प्ले कर सकते हैं अपनी रेवेन्यू कंट्रीब्यूट करने में। आप सबके ज्वाइन करने का बहुत शुक्रिया।
Thank you. And with these opening remarks and analysis, let me turn to Dr. Khalid Waleed, who's Research Fellow at STPI.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waqar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. My takeaways from yesterday's budget was that there was talk on homegrown agenda, inclusive and sustainable growth, how to reduce this government-determined economy and drive it towards a more market-driven sort of economy, targeted subsidies, energy governance. That was the hallmark as well. And then how to reduce generation cost, climate resilience, and right sizing. So it was focused on stabilization, structural sort of things, as rightly mentioned by Dr. Abed as well, that it was a balanced sort of budget where stabilization and fiscal consolidation was the main part. I would be talking more on energy sector and climate. In terms of energy sector, 253 billion rupees have been allocated for energy sector, plus 85 billion in terms of hydroelectric dams. For 2 dams, I would be giving more details later. In terms of energy transmission and distribution system, out of public sector development program, about 65 billion rupees have been allocated for asset performance management system for distribution transformers. This will sort of trigger this structural sort of thing in energy sector where the efficient distribution efficiency can be tagged through this performance management system. Additional 5 billion have been earmarked for energy efficiency in terms of distribution systems, whereas 11 billion rupees have been allocated for upgradation of NTDC network. One thing to note here is in previous budget, only 5 billions were allocated for NTDC improvement. So the focus here is on improving NTDC. In terms of power generation, one thing that was odd in finance minister's speech was that the finance minister highlighted that we need to cater for this growing electricity power demand, whereas the number shows a contrary trend. If you see power system statistics, fiscal year 2023, you'll see about 10% electricity consumption have been decreased compared with fiscal year 2022. But still, in terms of power generation, there were 3 projects have been allocated. Mohammed Dam, hydroelectric dam, 45 billion rupees have been allocated. Last year, 10.6 billion rupees were allocated for this dam. In terms of Deamir Bhasha Dam, about 40 billion rupees have been allocated. And Jamshoro coal power plant, 21 billion rupees. In last year's budget, 12 billion rupees were allocated for Jamshoro coal power plant. Still, the government is focusing on building these coal assets. Maybe it would not be good for environment and climate sort of reasons. Secondly, investing more on capacity expansion, that would not be feasible for Pakistan presently. In terms of energy efficiency, about 2 billion rupees are allocated for energy efficient fans. This is an initiative initiated by National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority because Pakistan's cooling load is higher. If you compare the statistics in summer, you'll see about the electricity peaks about 30,000 megawatts, whereas in winter, it comes down to about 12,000 megawatts. So the target here is to introduce energy efficiency through reducing the cooling load in Pakistan. 4 billion rupees have been allocated for EVs, majorly 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. That would kickstart this EV and greener mobility solutions in Pakistan. Energy sector subsidies. Subsidies have been increased. If you compare it with subsidy statistics in last year's revised estimates of about 584 billion, it has increased to about 1.19 trillion rupees, 103% increase in subsidies of power sector. Total subsidies have increased by about 28%. In terms of subsidies, the power division subsidies for power division increased by about the share of power division is about 87%. The petroleum division's share is about 1%. So total, the share of energy subsidies in total subsidies is about 88%. If you compare it with last year's budget, the last year's share was about 93%, and the revised share was about 59%. If you bifurcate this subsidy, there are 3 or 4 important heads. The subsidies for interdisco tariff differential, which is key to address this circular debt, it has been increased by 54% from 150 billion to 276 billion rupees. Subsidies for merged districts in KP, it has increased by 45%. Another interesting thing to note is that the subsidies for tariff differential to AJK, it has been increased by 332% from 25 billion to 108 billion rupees. Subsidies for K Electric for tariff differential have been decreased by 24% from 228 billion in last year's revised estimates to about 174 billion. In terms of lump sum power subsidy, 215 billion will be provided to government-owned power plants, particularly GENCOs, to make them efficient and to make them financially stable. In terms of tariff differential subsidies and arrears for K Electric, 88 billion. For subsidies to petroleum sector, they are 18.4 billion rupees. In terms of climate, there have been a significant amount of allocation as compared to last year's budget. The main focus of climate is that how to sort of tag public sector expenditures with gender and climate lens. For mitigation, for adaptation, 53 billion have been allocated. For mitigation, about 25 billion have been allocated. This has been increased by about 100%. And the supporting areas, about 25 billions have been allocated. For disaster and pre and post disaster planning, about 60 billion rupees have been allocated. So this is the summary in terms of my opinion on energy sector allocations for this year's budget. I guess the structural reforms were in focus. Maybe more focus can be given to energy distribution, power distribution, transmission sector, as compared to power generation sector. In terms of solar, as Dr. Abid has mentioned, that exemptions have been given to local manufacturing of solar panels, batteries, inverters. This would make more clarities about government's policy in terms of net metering, in terms of rooftop solars, because we have seen earlier that there was some negative signals about solar panels and rooftop solars. So this is clear that the government is favoring the local manufacturing of solar panel and local industries. With this, thank you so much again for joining us. Back to you, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. So I think you make a very important point that the government is not backtracking from its earlier plans to transition to green and clean energy, to transition towards renewable energy. And the budget certainly makes provisions and interventions to cater for a faster transition towards renewable energy, which is heartening to note. So with this, let me turn to Dr. Fariha, who's a research fellow at STPI.
Thank you, Dr. Waqar. So yesterday, around 18.5 trillion rupee budget was presented by the Federal Finance Minister. I'll be commenting on the social sector allocations. And if you look at the allocations made for the social sector, they're quite logical in a manner that all the allocations are aligned with the 4 mega trends going on in the region, which are income inequality and poverty, the demographic shifts, the climate change that is happening, and the digitalization aspect. So all four have been focused upon in this budget, and especially if we talk about income inequality and poverty. So for social protection allocations, it was an unprecedented budget that Social Protection Authority of BISP received yesterday. An amount, record amount of 593 billion was allocated to BISP, and last year it was 472 billion, the highest amount that BISP ever received so far. So if we look at the figures, it is actually a 27% increase from the last year budget allocations for the BISP. And there is a certain logic to this, as these allocations for the BISP yesterday, they resonate very well with the alignments of the IMF towards reducing inequality, enhancing the ambit of social protection, and encompassing more poor and vulnerable under the social safety nets, and also mitigating the rising effect of inflation on poor in Pakistan. So IMF reiterated this last year as well when negotiating the package. There is a priority for social protection portfolio for IMF, and that has been endorsed by the government. And of course, this is going to, this compliance in terms of social protection allocations in the fiscal space will definitely be strengthening the coalition government case for attaining the IMF package. So the budget 2024-25 aim not only at increasing the number of BISP beneficiaries from 9.3 million to 10 million, which is again quite rational if you look at the figure of 39% below the poverty line in Pakistan. And of course, this amount of 593 billion is going to be spent on the unconditional cash transfer program of Kafalat, and also on the associated conditional cash transfer programs of Talimi Wazaif and Nasho-Nama. And apart from inflation adjustment, there's a whole lot of focus on increasing the portfolio of Talimi Wazaif. Currently, 10.4 million are enrolled under it. And as per the finance minister's speech yesterday, 1 million will be enrolled additionally this year. Further, the program of Nasho-Nama for pregnant and lactating women with children under the age of 2 years, 500,000 will be additionally enrolled this year under these allocations. And of course, there is also a focus on increasing the quarterly compensation, looking at the exacerbated level of inflation that the poor and vulnerable are facing in Pakistan. So the quarterly payments, there's an estimate that the quarterly payments are going to rise from 10,500 rupee per household to at least 13,000 rupee per household. And there was a special mention of economic inclusion by the finance minister yesterday, where he mentioned 2 programs that will be rolled out under these allocations to BISP, which is Poverty Graduation and Skill Development Program, which is going to actually provide vocational skills to the children of the beneficiaries, and also a special mention concerning the hybrid social protection scheme under Crisis Resilient Social Protection Program. It's one-of-a-kind contributory scheme to build resilience in the face of catastrophes and climate action. And also further, if we explore further and look at the pensions portfolio, again, reforms have been suggested for pension. However, there was also a mention to ease out the burden that is caused by the heavy portfolio of pensions. And there was a mention of a contribution pension scheme. So if we technically look at this budget is driving Pakistan towards an aspect of social insurance, where there is contributory pension scheme, there is contributory saving schemes, all coming under, not only coming under the umbrella of social protection authorities, but also under the fiscal space. And so the social protection allocations are very much in line with there's a certain alignment, strategic thinking behind it, especially in line with the IMF agenda. But there are also certain disappointing factors. The trade-off between education, health, and social protection is not a balanced one. There must have been a balancing act, because what education received yesterday was altogether 32 billion, primary education, secondary education, and the tertiary education. And there has been a decline in this portfolio over time. And we have seen that how economic survey that just came out a day before, it states 62% literacy rate. We are currently facing a crisis of a learning emergency declared by the Premier himself last month. And this consideration to the education portfolio has not been given. Health only received 17 billion for the entire population. So there must have been a balancing act for increasing the education portfolio. We have seen how Higher Education Commission requested to reinstate the tertiary education budget back to 65 billion just a few days ago. And still, this is 32 billion education. And of course, there were certain measures concerning education that were announced yesterday by the finance minister, which are around the extension of the Danish school system and also EdTech allocations for digitization in schools, smart screens, tablets, ICT access, and also turning 16 degree colleges in Islamabad, but they're quite limited to the federal capital. And there's a focus on female education in terms of intervention of pink buses for easing out the transportation limitation of the female students, especially pertaining to the rural areas, and also early childhood education centers to be established in 100 schools nationwide. However, there are expectations that this is going to actually create an imbalance for the poverty crisis and the learning crisis, especially at the primary and secondary level, and much more allocations were needed in the first place. I would like to stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Sahiba, for these inputs. And as you said, that the budget has, the allocation has expanded for social protection in this budget, as well as pro-poor expenditures under various other heads. And while, of course, this increase is there, we, of course, also bear in mind that this increase comes on top of high inflation, of course. So the inflation adjusted numbers may be somewhat lower, but it's heartening to see that the direction is correct and the direction favors the low-income group. So with this, let me turn to Dr. Sajid Amin for his remarks on the budget.
Thank you. I'm sorry, मैं थोड़ा late हो गया हूँ. I'll just touch on three things on budget, and genuinely from a more macro perspective, which really macro. I mean, let's see what were the three criterias that we were expecting this budget to judge on. The first was the what does IMF feel about this budget? So first criteria जो government खुद भी कह रही थी कि this is a budget within the framework of IMF, and I think उस budget उस हद तक इस budget ने कोशिश की है successfully deliver करने की कि वो जो IMF के targets थे या जो conditions थे, और उसमें मुझे लगता है कि जो mainly driving idea है इस budget का वो revenue targets को meet करना है, जो 12.97 ट्रिलियन का रखा गया है. पिछले साल की निस्बत जो 40%, 38 से 40% ज्यादा है पिछले साल की निस्बत. और वहां पे मुझे लगता है जो गवर्नमेंट गाइड ले रही है वो ये है कि 22 और 23 की आप अगर देखें ग्रोथ तो वो 30% के करीब है. तो उसी को मद्देनजर रखते हुए शायद गवर्नमेंट ने इस साल 40 का टारगेट जो है वो कर दिया है. लेकिन उसमें मुझे लगता है कि एक जो बड़ा फैक्टर है जो गवर्नमेंट मिस कर रही है वो बुनियादी तौर पे इन्फ्लेशन का है कि इस साल 26% एवरेज इन्फ्लेशन रहा है. अगर आप फाइनेंशियल ईयर 23-24 था हमारा तो 26% इन्फ्लेशन था. तो अगर गवर्नमेंट अगले साल के लिए बजट कर रही है 12% का इन्फ्लेशन, थोड़ा उससे ज्यादा होगा, हम इस पे जाते हैं, तो शायद ये जो टारगेट मीट करना है 12.97 ट्रिलियन का ये बहुत ज्यादा डिफिकल्ट होगा. बट ऑन द फेस वैल्यू ये था कि IMF ने चूंकि ये था कि उसमें, और बट आई एम नॉट सेटिंग नेगेटिवली, पाकिस्तान नीड्स एन IMF प्रोग्राम, सो वी हैव टू हैव दिस, जो कुछ कंडीशंस थी उनको मीट करना, क्योंकि दिस वाज बजट एज ए प्रायर ऑफ IMF टॉक्स. तो उस हद तक ये पहला क्राइटेरिया था तो उसमें अगर आप देखें जो नंबर्स हैं, चाहे वो फिस्कल डेफिसिट के हैं, चाहे वो रेवेन्यू टारगेट्स के हैं, वो सारे के सारे गवर्नमेंट ने हाई साइड अप साइड रखे हैं, जो कि शो कर रहा है गवर्नमेंट की कमिटमेंट को कि हम इनको मीट करेंगे। हम फिर उसके जाते हैं कि इकदाम क्या थे। जो दूसरा क्राइटेरिया था जो बहुत ज्यादा एक्सपेक्टेड था, बहुत चूंकि बात हो रही थी रिफॉर्म्स के हवाले से, था कि ये एक बड़ी स्ट्रक्चरल रिफॉर्म्स लेके आएगा ये बजट। मुझे लगता है वहां ये बजट थोड़ा सा बिलो एवरेज रहा है। इट डिडंट डिलीवर ऑन रिफॉर्म्स। मैं आज कहीं और बात कर रहा था कि हमें, अगर हम इस प्रेजेंटेशन को दो हिस्सों में तकसीम करें, तो जो पहले 25 मिनट थे देवर आइडियल, वेरी रिफॉर्म लोडेड, कि हम सारी डायरेक्शन सेट कर रहे हैं, हम मार्केट इकोनॉमी की तरफ जा रहे हैं। सो दिस वाज ऑल गुड फर्स्ट 20 मिनट्स। बट जब हम इसके बजट के अंदर जाते हैं तो हमें कोई ऐसी रिफॉर्म्स नज़र नहीं आती हैं जो फॉर एग्जांपल टैक्स स्ट्रक्चर को चेंज कर रही हैं, टैक्स बेस को बढ़ा रही हैं। वहाँ पे अगेन जो इक्तफा है वो दो ही चीज़ों पे किया गया है जो ट्रेडिशनल है। पहला यह है कि आपने सैलरीड क्लास को इनडायरेक्टली बर्डन कर दिया है, नॉट डायरेक्टली। मार्केट में चूंकि स्पेकुलेशन थी कि आपका जो हाई स्लैब है, हायर स्लैब है आपकी, जो 35% है 45% पे जा सकती है, वो नहीं किया गया है। लेकिन नए लोगों को हाई स्लैब्स में लिया। आप में से बहुत सारे लोग शायद नई स्लैब में जा रहे होंगे, तो आपका जो टैक्स है, और उसमें अगर आप रफ कैलकुलेशन करें, क्योंकि अभी चूंकि नंबर शायद चेंज हो सकते हैं, वो लोग, और इसको अगर आप मिला के पढ़ते हैं सैलरी इंक्रीज के साथ, तो बड़ा नॉन प्रोग्रेसिव नजर आता है। मैं एग्रेसिव नहीं कह रहा हूं, बट नॉन प्रोग्रेसिव नजर आता है। मसलन कि अगर आप 45,000 या 49,000 रुपया ले रहे थे तो आप टैक्स स्लैब में नहीं थे। अब आपकी 25% सैलरी इंक्रीज हुई है तो अब आप एक नए टैक्स स्लैब में आ गए हैं। तो जो इंक्रीज है वो बहुत सारे केसेस में स्मॉलर है देन द टेकन अवे मनी जो आपको नए टैक्स स्लैब में जाके देना पड़ेगा। और जस्ट ऑन द टॉप कि जो 25% का इंक्रीज है और 22% का जो इंक्रीज है, ये बड़ा ही हैरान कुन है। मतलब इसकी कोई समझ नहीं आई कि ये कैसे प्रोग्रेसिव करता है सिस्टम को। वो लोग जो ऑलरेडी हाई टैक्स ले रहे थे, हाई स्लैब में थे, जो लॉस स्लैब में थे, उनको फायदा हुआ है। अगर 100 रुपया सैलरी है तो 25% 25 रुपए बढ़ गए हैं। अगर 1,000 रुपया सैलरी है तो 88 रुपए बढ़ गए हैं 22% पे। आपका टैक्स बढ़ गया है, टैक्स स्लैब चेंज हो गई है। वहां पे वो ऑलरेडी हाई टैक्स स्लैब में थे तो वहां टैक्स स्लैब चेंज नहीं हुई, तो दे आर द नेट गेनर्स एक्चुअली। तो वो तबका जो ऑलरेडी ज्यादा सैलरी ले रहा था वो नेट गेनर के तौर पे नजर आ रहा होगा। जो मिडिल और बिलो वाले हैं सैलरी वाले, वो शायद नए स्लैब चेंज होने की वजह से उसमें जा रहे होंगे। इसी तरह रिटेलर्स को अगर हम देखते हैं, जहां बहुत बात हो रही थी, तो वहां अगेन ताजर दोस्त स्कीम ही पे इक्तफा किया गया। कोई ऐसे रिफॉर्म्स नहीं है कि जहां पे उनको फोर्सफुली या पुश करके कुछ ऐसे इनिशिएटिव्स हों कि उनको वहां पे सिर्फ ये किया गया है कि विद होल्डिंग टैक्स आपका 1% से बढ़ा के 2% कर दिया गया है। वो रेवेन्यू तो बढ़ाएगा बट टैक्स बेस को नहीं बढ़ाएगा। तो जो टैक्स के मेजर्स ले गए हैं दे आर गाइडेड बाय रेवेन्यू टारगेट्स, नॉट इंक्रीजिंग द टैक्स बेस। तो यहाँ पे मुझे लगता है कि वो गवर्नमेंट ने कोशिश की है कि जो है वो IMF भी नाराज ना हो, और जो उनकी पॉलिटिकल बेस है, जो ताजर हैं, बिजनेस तबका है, वो भी नाराज ना हो। तो वहाँ पे अगेन उसी ताजर दोस्त स्कीम पे ही इत्तेफाक किया। तो रिफॉर्म्स की हद तक इट हैज़ डिलीवर्ड बिलो एवरेज, अगर हम स्ट्रक्चरल रिफॉर्म्स की बात करें। टैक्स बेस को बढ़ाना हो, गवर्नेंस के रिफॉर्म्स हों या बाकी रिफॉर्म्स हों उसके अंदर, हाँ डायरेक्शन की हद तक मार्केट इकोनॉमी के, जैसे मैंने कहा, ये कहना एक जो है वो फेयर टैक्सेशन, सबको टैक्स नेट में लाना, तमाम लोगों को, वो जो एग्जेम्पशंस हैं टैक्स की उसको ख़त्म करना। उसकी तफसील अभी देखना होगी कि वो किस हद तक ख़त्म होती हैं, किन किन सेक्टर से ख़त्म हो पाती हैं। तो वहाँ पे मुझे लगता है रिफॉर्म्स में तीसरा यही था कि आम आदमी के लिए इसमें क्या है, जो मेरे ख्याल हम जैसे इदारों के लिए सबसे अहम भी होता है कि उसमें ये है, आई थिंक बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं है। ये स्टेबलाइजेशन का बजट है, पिछले 4 साल की तरह जो हमने बजट पेश किया है, दिस इज अगेन स्टेबलाइजेशन बजट। तो आम आदमी के लिए को बहुत ज़्यादा इसके अंदर नहीं है। इन्फ्लेशन मोर और लेस जो है वो शायद इन्होंने जो टारगेट 12% का किया है, ये उतना बड़ा डिफरेंस नहीं होगा जितना पिछले साल था, क्योंकि शायद पिछले साल 11% का किया गया था और वो कुछ 26-30% पे चला गया। इस साल 12 का किया है, तो शायद 15 से 17 की रेंज में रहने का जो है ना वो एक्सपेक्टेड है। लेकिन डिपेंडिंग ऑन कि हम IMF का प्रोग्राम कितना जल्दी ले पाते हैं। with this budget, अगर IMF का प्रोग्राम टाइमली आता है तो वो शायद हम जो बजट का टारगेट है वो को 2-3 परसेंटेज पॉइंट ही से वेरी कर रहे होंगे, कोई बहुत बड़ा डिफरेंस उसमें नहीं आ रहा होगा। लेकिन अगर IMF का प्रोग्राम किसी भी वजह से डिले होता है, जो कल हमने देखा बजट पेश होने से पहले ऑन पॉलिटिकल फ्रंट्स, पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में, जो कोएलिशन गवर्नमेंट है उसकी अपनी जो ओनरशिप है इस बजट की, अगर इस तरह के फैक्टर से IMF थोड़ा डिले होता है और आप 3.6% का ग्रोथ रेट अगर टारगेट कर रहे हैं, तो उसमें मुझे लगा है कि सर कैड जो है वो अंडर बजट किया गया है। क्योंकि जो जब आपका 3.6% ग्रोथ रेट की तरफ आप जाएंगे, तो आपका जो करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट है वो ज़्यादा तेज़ी से बढ़ेगा, और ख़ासकर एक्सपोर्ट्स शायद लेस देन एक्सपेक्टेड हो सकती हैं या लेस देन बजटेड हो सकती हैं। कल के बजट के बाद भी जो ज़ाहिर एक्सपोर्टर्स के ऊपर भी एक आएगा वो शायद चेंज हो रहा हो, बट जस्ट मोर और लेस मुझे लगता है कैड को जो है वो अंडर बजट किया गया है लास्ट ईयर की तरह। और लास्ट ईयर तो चूंकि वो स्लो ग्रोथ हो गई बहुत ज़्यादा, तो उसकी वजह से जो इसमें आ सकता है। 4 टारगेट्स जो हैं जो मुझे लगता है जैसे हमने लास्ट ईयर भी कहा था कि वो शायद इन कंट्राडिक्शन टू ईच अदर हैं, चारों को साइमल्टेनियसली अचीव करना शायद थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट होगा। उसमें रेवेन्यू का टारगेट है 12.97 ट्रिलियन का, अगर आप इस पे जाते हैं और बहुत टफ IMF प्रोग्राम के साथ जाते हैं तो 3.6 का जो ग्रोथ रेट है GDP का, वो मुश्किल हो जाएगा। और उसकी एक वजह और भी है ये कि अगर आप इस साल का भी ग्रोथ रेट देखें, जो हमने हार्डली सर पूरा किया है, वो एग्रीकल्चर से आया है। एग्रीकल्चर का जो बजटेड ग्रोथ रेट था वो 3.5 था, बट जो एक्चुअल आया है वो 6.25% के करीब जो वो आया है उसके अंदर। तो अगर आप उसको निकाल दें, तो अगेन वी वर फॉलोइंग शॉर्ट ऑफ जो हमने इवन 2.4 का टारगेट रखा हुआ था। तो सारी जो फोरकास्ट है वो 2% के थे, एग्रीकल्चर की वजह से हम गए हैं। तो अगर आप एक बहुत टफ प्रोग्राम में जाते हैं और ये 12.97 ट्रिलियन को एक्सट्रैक्ट करने की कोशिश करते हैं, एक्सपोर्टर और जो बाकी सारी स्कीम्स हैं उनको रखते हुए, तो फिर शायद ये जो 3.6% का ग्रोथ रेट का टारगेट है वो मुश्किल होगा। अगर आप इसको अचीव करते हैं दोनों को, तो फिर आपका जो कैड का टारगेट है वो जो है वो बढ़ सकता है। और इन्फ्लेशन जो है, तो ओवरऑल जस्ट टू समराइज सर, IMF प्रोग्राम फोकस्ड बजट है, गाइडेड बाय वेरी शॉर्ट विजन है। इस साल सिर्फ 1 साल का विजन है इस बजट का कि IMF का प्रोग्राम लेना है, दैट इज द विजन विच इज गाइडिंग। और वहां पे आपको नंबर्स ज्यादा फोकस मिलता है देन रिफॉर्म्स। तो आपका रेवेन्यू टारगेट और फिस्कल डेफिसिट और ये जो प्राइमरी सरप्लस देना है वो मेन फोकस है। रिफॉर्म्स इज बिलो एवरेज, स्ट्रक्चरल रिफॉर्म्स आर मिसिंग, और आई थिंक दिस इज अ बिग मिसिंग अपॉर्चुनिटी। वो आप किसी भी सेक्टर के उसके अंदर से ले लें, और लोगों के लिए शायद बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं है इसमें। इनडायरेक्टली इन्फ्लेशनरी प्रेशर्स आपके GST एग्जाम्पशंस को ख़त्म करने से आएंगे। वो ऑलमोस्ट काफ़ी प्रेशर होगा, बट उसके लिए शायद इन्फॉर्मेशन और चाहिए होगी कि GST कहाँ कहाँ पे ख़त्म हो रहा है और क्या क्या एग्जाम्पशन है उसमें। PDL जो है, हमारी अपनी SDPI की कैलकुलेशन होती है कि जब भी आप 10 रुपये PDL में बढ़ाते हैं तो आपका जो इन्फ्लेशन है वो 1.5 परसेंटेज पॉइंट 1.5% बढ़ जाता है। अगर आपने 20 बढ़ाया है तो इसका मतलब है 3 के करीब आपका 2.5 से 3%। और अगर आप इसको GST एग्जेम्पशंस के साथ और जो हमने मैन्युफैक्चरिंग के ऊपर जो होल्डिंग टैक्स को किया है, अगर उसको भी, क्योंकि वो भी पास ऑन करेंगे, इन सबको अगर आप मिलाते हैं, इसी तरह जो फेडरल एक्साइज ड्यूटी आपने सीमेंट और इन चीज़ों पे बढ़ाई, अगर उन सबको मिलाते हैं, तो इन्फ्लेशनरी प्रेशर जो है वो आ सकते हैं। आम आदमी के लिए जो लाइफ है, वो हाई कास्ट ऑफ लिविंग, लो एम्प्लॉयमेंट की जो अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ हैं, ये इस साल भी जारी रहने की तवक्को है। थैंक यू।
Thank you, Dr. Sajid. I think this was a very comprehensive overview covering both revenue as well as expenditure side. So let me now open the floor and Jeet Arsa, please.
Just quick comment है मेरे इस पे आपकी सुनने के बाद। शमशाद अख्तर साहिबा ने she prepared the homegrown agenda which the IMF called albeit insipid. It is temporary and too insignificant. It looks like that it's just another layer on that homegrown agenda which the government is taking forward. The most important line in the budget speech was the last line that the finance minister read, that he said that without the guidance of without the political instability, this cannot happen. We cannot achieve anything. And that is with your guidance continuously. What does it mean on the economic front? Because budget is a policy statement. Policy statement. All those increase in salaries will be spent in that is going, the cash it would be monetary expansion. And as you said, the petroleum levy, 20 rupees each, that would be. So if you calculate with unbiased, I think it would be 20% inflation, not 12%. If not 20%, then somewhere between 15 and 20%. So the public that is following a political trend against the government, is going to continue. So it is unlikely that IMF program would be, we're going to have home the IMF program in the stipulated. What does it mean? That means at least in the first quarter, because the first quarter will set the tone. And the income that is going to come from the export, 29% income on the final settlement of the exporter, which was only 1% final settlement with the exporter. So we expect that the export revenue, that is unlikely. And on agriculture, they have said 2%. What has happened with the wheat, still if you go to the market, there is no money with the farmer to sow the next crop. So even this 2% is unlikely if we take the growth on the wheat and other things. So I think the budget is, it's not very realistic. That is my feeling.
Ji Sohail, आप कहना चाह रहे थे? You wanted to make a point? आपका hand raised था.
So hand मतलब suggestion नहीं था, but एक question था कि पहले जो फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर थे उनकी कल स्पीच जब सुन रहा था तो उन्होंने बोला था कि हम मिनिस्ट्रीज को कट अप करेंगे, अपने सारे इसके एक्सपेंडिचर को कट अप करेंगे, लेकिन इवेंचुअली एक साइड पे आके उन्होंने ये भी ऐड कर दिया कि हम क्लाइमेट चेंज अथॉरिटी को भी बनाएंगे. तो क्या ये अच्छा डिसीजन है कि एक साइड पे आप गवर्नमेंट के एक्सपेंडिचर्स को कम भी कर रहे हैं, करने की बात कर रहे हैं, और फिर आप एक वैल्यू एडिशन भी कर रहे हैं अपनी मिनिस्ट्रीज में, अपनी अथॉरिटीज में? तो इसका एक्सपेंडिचर पे, गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर पे कितना फर्क पड़ेगा, और क्या ये अच्छा डिसीजन था गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से कल की बजट में?
Thank you. So when I come back to the panel, maybe we can address your question, Ji. Ji, Mahanur.
Ji, thank you, Dr. Waqar. First of all, very important and insightful interventions from all of you. I completely understand that this budget and the IMF program essentially is contingent upon whatever has been decided in this budget. And like Dr. Sajid also mentioned, a lot of these targets seem quite overambitious. And while, of course, the social protection aspect of the budget has been revised, and you see mother-child health, for example, being considered in all of that. But like all developing countries, Pakistan also has a very important agenda that it needs to keep in mind when making all of its policies or deciding any way forward. And that's women, economic empowerment, financial inclusion, including women in the trade space, etc. So keeping that in mind, a lot of the initiatives and the announcements made under the budget with regards to trade, retail, etc., are very carpeted sort of policies, and they do not cater to women's financial inclusion and women economic empowerment. I'm just going to mention a few that I got a chance to jot down. For example, exporters will be brought under normal tax regime as per horizontal tax equity rules. There's the EFS limit for exporters is going to be enhanced. There's advanced withholding tax on wholesalers and retailers and distributors for non-filers to increase from 1% to 2.25%. Then there's a decision to end sales tax exemptions and subsidized rates and exemptions. There's then the 18% sales tax will be levied on tier 1 retailers of textiles and leather, for example. And then the decision to increase rates of duties on import of certain sectors. So while these are carpeted reforms, and perhaps the men-owned, men-led businesses might not, they will be affected, of course, but then the women-led businesses and the women-led SMEs who are trying to be part of the trade space or become financially empowered, they will be greatly affected, even more as compared to these male-led businesses, SMEs, and exporters. So I feel that this question need to be brought to the table, and something that the government needs to be reminded about, that while these have been announced and the IMF will of course be coming to the table based on these reforms, women need to be kept in mind. And in this year, um, these reforms, maybe there can be some sort of amendments announced, particularly for women, so that financial inclusion and women economic empowerment does not take a hit, a major hit. So that's for me.
Thank you. I think you make a very important point that if these are the provisions for export side, where on the one hand, exporters are subjected to increased tax, on the other side, EFS scheme remains, then what is the overall picture of trade policy? I think that's we don't see a direction whether we are going into export orientation or not. So that's an important point. Vas, if you wanted to comment.
I have a couple of points to make with regards to the tobacco taxation. There are a couple of changes. Yeah, but sir, it's not about numbers. It's more regarding enforcement measures and all that stuff. So the government has enhanced the threshold price from 9,000 to 12,500 per 1,000 sticks. And as a result, the minimum price of cigarettes has increased from 127 to 177 per 20 pack. This increase in threshold price allows firms to increase the price net of taxes of economy brands, which are low tier brands. The second point which I was trying to make is the government has introduced a tax on nicotine pouches, and that is 1,200 per kg, just like it was on e-cigarettes earlier. Number third, they have introduced a mixed system of 65% ad valorem and 10,000 per kg, whichever is higher on e-liquids, and earlier it was a specific tax on only 10,000 rupees per kg of e-liquid. Number fourth point was that they have introduced a new item referred as estate tow, which is a filter which is used in cigarette. Earlier it was 2,000 rupees per kg, and now they have introduced a tax of 44,000 rupees per kg on this item. And if this is more of an administrative measure, that if any retailer is found selling cigarettes pack without tax stamps, affixing counterfeited tax stamps, brand rollers, stickers, labels, the retailer outlet of such person shall be liable to be sealed in that manner as prescribed in the budget document. So this is regarding tobacco sector.
Thank you, Asif. So I think in overall terms, the recommendation that usually goes out is that if one has to decrease or at least help in reduction of consumption of tobacco and tobacco products, one should be proposing higher levels of taxation, improved track and trace system at FBR. And because once you increase the taxes on tobacco products, people tend to go for illegally imported tobacco items. So therein we require enforcement mechanisms so that tobacco products coming from informal and illegal channels should also be curbed, right?
I think there is space for more
taxation. That's right. That's right. And we were expecting more taxes in this budget, something which maybe they would like to. Yes. So we have an online question that at the moment Pakistan needs more dollar inflows. Does imposing tax on export sector really help the cause of Pakistan at this stage? Yes. So Yasir Saeed Saab has asked, and when I come back to the panel, I'll request Dr. Freeha to answer this question. So Irfan, you wanted to come in, please?
Question as well. So mainly if we see that during the past 10 to 15 years, what we have been advocating, somehow it's working also if you, because the ratio of direct to indirect taxation 35, 65 to 45, 35, something in that sense. And somehow we are not always again comes to the caveat that taxation might have not got this because so it is stated this. Then secondly, about taxation on agriculture fertilizers, I believe that should have been avoided, considering that not only because agriculture helped us reach the targets. One number that was more important than the number of crops was the increased production and sales of tractors. So although automobile sector growth, the production, both sales of tractors went up for 50%. So it does imply that farmers, some extending the small holders, they are trying to be more capital intensive, but at the same time, using fertilizers might affect their input. Then, in terms of reforms, Father mentioned that we did not see reforms. So basically, as we have been repeatedly saying for the last few years as well, this is mainly counting exercise. So you see last year's tax report. So last year, because of zero rating and exemptions, the government lost about 0.5 billion rupees in revenue, and now we are just increasing the revenue by 5 billion. So basically, instead of making some, so I would call it more formative than we are receiving past those lost revenues. So now in this budget, mostly we're doing is adjusting those exemptions for zero ratings, trying to meet the targets. 12-15% just the performance increase, inflation with the against. So the adjustments of zero rating and exemptions. Now I have the same question as well. Like respond about the dollar inflows, because previously 1% was being charged on the turnover. So effectively it translated into 20 to 25%. It's now being 29%. I believe that the government went for this money is because the finance ministry is from the sector, and they know that the exporters cannot park their receipts outside Pakistan for long because they have to prepare the inputs as well. So I think considering that exporters are always in the need of bringing in the proceeds, that's why they did win for this move. But let's see how that will affect the forex market dynamics. No, but my opinion is that now statement would be more aggressive in purchasing any surplus from the open markets. They not leave it in the open market. They would purchase the surplus from the open market, so that the open market is less and lesser, less least liquidity, which would force the exporters to bring in the receipts to the market, the banking channels. So I think state bank would be more aggressive.
So maybe I'll take two more
comments.
And then I come back to the floor, Asif and then Obaid maybe. And we also have a question from Mubin that considering the IMF's emphasis on energy sector viability, what structural reforms are necessary? Second, he's also asking on which reforms are necessary to improve the performance of state-owned enterprises in the energy sector and what the budget may be missing in this regard. Asif.
Thank you, Dr. Kar. So let me start with the figures of IMF. The IMF quoted that a projected trade deficit of Pakistan in current fiscal year 2025 is likely to be increased. To be more specific, as per IMF estimations, our imports will likely to be around 60.5 billion as compared to our export volume, which will be around 32.8 billion. So our trade deficit will be around 27.8 billion. So what Dr. Sajid was discussing about current account deficit, so Pakistan will likely to face current account deficit in upcoming fiscal year. Then the plant and machinery will be taxed at a higher rate, which will increase our the capital expenditures of industry. So the large-scale manufacturing sector, which is already facing a stagnant growth path, is likely to be facing a hit on their profits and growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Asif. Obaid.
Thank you. I think perhaps one question and then sort of a response as well, that in the new budget, I mean, we have very clearly mentioned that there is going to be no tax on imports of solar. So is there any clear indication of what the government actually wants to do? Because just very previously, we have been seeing some negative news going around the solar net metering, and the government was of the view that this is being done so to bring more consumers onto the national grid. And also the government also repeatedly stated that the whole discussion around the net metering is going because the Pakistan wants to remain under the umbrella of the IMF as well, which also stated similar. So now, I mean, this is a good initiative, but what exactly is government thinking on two different fronts as well? So perhaps this is a more clear indication. And I think just one point, that since the announcement of budget yesterday, there have been a lot of anger that has been shown on around I mean, there's a very clear indication that we want to increase the tax net, but with the interventions such as the exclusion list and all that. So, but as per the expert panel sitting over here, what could be some very simple or clear interventions which it could have taken instead of coming up with any particular sectors which we could have actually gone to instead of these interventions? And I think just very lastly, one response to sort of Suhail's comments that for the Climate Change Authority, I think in the rules, it is very clearly mentioned that the authority will actually run from a climate change fund that will actually be established through different projects that the authority will actually bring in, which could be different green financing projects that actually come up. So authority was supposed to be run partially on those funds as well. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please.
I just want to talk about Panda bonds. Yesterday, the finance minister talked about Panda bonds. So do you see that these bonds could help, is a step in right direction, or these bonds could be used as a source of climate finance or green finance? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Under the circumstances, any source of finance is good for us. Need to keep the patient away from ventilator, But anyway, I'll let the panelists touch on this. So let me start from my left. Dr. Fariha, please.
So I would like to respond to the question concerning the exports and then the question concerning women empowerment and financial inclusion. So it's a very pertinent question around exports. There was a lot of discussion around bringing the exports under regular tax regime and imposition of withholding tax along with certain others. And what analysts are seeing, and this is also my personal view as well, that this is coming as a diffuser in the system rather as an enabler. If you take a look at the problem is that last year, this year, the indicator shows that it was 1.21% industrial growth rate that our industries depicted. And again, the very similar 1.21% that our services growth rate. And the targets that have been set in this budget for the next year is 4.4% for industries and 4.1% growth rate for the service sector. And just like Dr. Sajid mentioned, that agriculture sector performed with 6.25%, whereas if we look at our textile industry growth rate, it is negative 8.3%. And then if we look at the structure of our large-scale manufacturing sector and our medium-scale manufacturing sector, it is actually the textile cotton firms and the textile synthetic firms that are dominating. And if you even look at the Karachi Stock Exchange listings of the firms which are actually mother of the manufacturing sector, half of the firms out of 500 firms pertain to textile industry. And this is the backbone of our exporting portfolio, and bringing them all of a sudden into a regular tax regime at an unprecedented level, and which something they've not been used to in the past, that is going to create a lot of problems, especially for the export targets that are set for the coming year, for the growth target of the industrial sector. And this is going to actually affect them, their income, by 35 to 40%. And this is the figure which is actually coming out. So this has to be very systematic in nature and streamlined, rather imposing it right away in this manner, where the industry is already suffering. And then we are also experiencing a very high policy rate still, at which the private sector is actually shedding credit, not taking up credit. So all these issues of growth rates combined with access to finance issues, expensive credit, and then meeting up these higher targets, expectations of meeting up these higher, they're in contradiction with each other. Coming to your question around women empowerment and financial inclusion. So again, there is, in this domain, there is a strategic alignment where the social protection authorities are taking care of the poor and vulnerable women under the safety nets like Benazir Income Support Program. And by default, it is women empowerment inclusion, because all the beneficiaries under BISP, they are, it's women who are recipient of cash, because there's a certain strategy to it, because they have this thrift habit of not only consuming, but also saving. So if you look at all the major programs globally, women are the recipient of cash. So from the very simple unconditional cash transfers to the conditional cash transfers to this launch of the contributory schemes, they're all touching upon the four core pillars of financial inclusion for the poor and vulnerable. And on the other side, if we see, State Bank of Pakistan is the gatekeeper of National Financial Inclusion Strategy that brings under its roof not only all the individuals, especially pertaining to better income groups, but also the enterprise sector. And both State Bank of Pakistan under NFIS and the Social Protection Authority like BISP, Punjab Social Protection Authority, and provincial protection authorities, they are trying to actually meet the targets, rolling out programs, and very much in line. And of course, it is a priority item on the national agenda, on the fiscal agenda, and also, again, a lot of enforcement by IMF, as even social protection numbers enhancement of a higher number of 10 million or 1.2 million. It is actually one of the conditionalities of the package that is being negotiated. It was a part and parcel of the last package as well, and this package as well. So I think so we are on track to a certain extent when we talk about women financial inclusion, empowerment. Other actors are also on the horizon, like SMEDA and other development partners also. So this is very much on track agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Faria. And I think your messages also go out loudly to the provinces who will be presenting their budget today. So given that a large part of social protection and social sector investment comes under their domain. So thank you for outlining these principles, Dr. Sajid.
So thank you. And some general comments, not responding to any question, but some general on touching on these questions. I think The comment from Mahanur was very basic. I mean, STPI has been and should be approach gender in all and all in gender approach. I mean, the focus of just tagging gender as a residual focus, as a something separate in some policies, that won't do the job actually. The gender lens should be a cornerstone of any policy. It's a macro policy, tax policy, whatever it is. So I think the message that should go from us is not that it's time to go beyond gender tagging. It's placing it at center, what we call gender in all and all in gender approach. That should be the number one. Number two, I think the question on tax equity for exporters, on vision, it's right. I mean, on the vision of it, it is the right direction actually. I think the exemptions that we have been giving over the last 7 decades haven't worked actually. This protectionism need to go. But the question is how gradually it should go. I mean, with just one day you are paying 1% and the next day you are paying 40% or 30%, that will create some sort of. So I think the question is not on the tax equity. It should be there, but how to implement it? What should be the graduation? Can it be staggered over next 3 years? I mean, the IMF program staggering and then taking it gradually. So that I think was the key question. And I don't see that it will affect much because this will be changed in the final budget. There's very highly likelihood that this budget will not be passed the way it is, particularly on these issues. So I think it will be going gradual, maybe 5 to 7% coming in this year and then staggering it over the time. And that will also not affect the dollar flows because this will be solved. And I think the dollar flow from the exports has been stagnant actually, no matter how much you give protectionism. It has been almost stagnant with some plus minus standard deviation you can add. So it won't it will be handled there. State Bank will be. It has all been aggressive on this context, but that is not a good aggression actually. It has to be on the market driven. On climate change, I think it's already done. We need to have this is another climate change SIFC that we will be having, running all the ministries on the climate change, the authority. The idea is that climate finance, it will be attracting. It's just doubtful that how much it will be attracting because we have seen, if you see the last trends, Pakistan has a very meager share in overall green financing of the climate financing that we have been receiving. It has to grow from inside, and this is where your question. The Panda bond comes from love with China, love from China. That's good always. But in principle, Pakistan need to have a very strong capital and equity markets, financial markets, to develop these sort of instruments of financing, modern instruments, both for national level and international levels, be it the social bonds, be it the green bonds, whatever the form it takes. So this is good, as Dr. Waqar said also, that anything that should be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. And I think we need to emphasize your last point further, which is about the deepening of capital markets in Pakistan. So if one has to promote capital markets or derivative instruments, such as the ones that you've mentioned, one would of course like to tax this market fairly. So on the one hand, you see that capital gains has been increased on the securities market. But on the other side, of course, the real estate can go scot-free. So this is probably why you see idle capital being parked in very non-productive sectors, whereas your capital market suffers essentially because people know that their money will come under the radar, they will be taxed heavily, whereas you have another avenue to keep the money where they can remain under the radar. So, Dr. Khalid, for your final remarks.
Thank you so much. I'll take two questions. One, the Sohail's on what is the right sizing approach. We see two sort of approaches. One is how to tackle inefficient SOEs, that is right sizing, and Prime Minister announced to sort of abolish PWD and reforming energy sector in terms of privatizing 9 discos and gencos. So there is one thing. Second is to establish climate change authority to attract more climate finance, as rightly mentioned by Dr. Sajid. The climate finance, I see it as an avenue where Pakistan have a potential. But the one thing that is lacking is that how we can sort of generate this local financing in terms of climate. So for that, National Climate Finance Strategy is bound to be presented in October 2024. Another dashboard, that is National Digital Climate Finance Monitoring Dashboard, that is also announced in the budget. And thirdly, the tagging of budget in terms of climate and gender, that would sort of bring the climate change public investment management assessment, that is CPMA framework of IMF. So that would be a good thing for attracting climate finance. Second question that was on energy sector reforms. In terms of energy sector reforms, I see there is a need to privatize entities, particularly DISCOs and GENCOs. But these reforms, they sort of, they should not be just privatizing. Particularly when it comes towards GENCOs, it should be coupled with transformation as well, just like the one we see in terms of GENCO 3, which has been privatized and which is bound to be repurposed in terms of its transformation towards a solar power plant that is being done under a PPA PPP sort of arrangement with Chinese company. So in terms of SOEs in energy sector, the reforms that we need, not just the privatization, but we need this structural sort of transformation as well. And lastly, the Panda bonds. In terms of Panda bonds, there has been talks when Prime Minister and Finance Minister was in China. They want to follow this Egyptian model. And Egyptian model is that you would need prior guarantees from ADB and AIIB, which would be difficult for Pakistan given this credit rating. But still, it is a welcome initiative in terms of that Pakistan can diversify its portfolio in terms of these sort of markets. And China has this growing market of Panda bonds. Secondly, given that China can finance Pakistan's green energy transition, Panda bonds or green Panda bonds can be one step that can be utilized under China's new initiative, that is Green Investment Finance Platform initiative, under which 100 billion USDs have been allocated for developing renewable energy markets. So linking energy markets with capital market and these sort of initiative that could kickstart this financial repurposing of Chinese investments in Pakistan.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. I think you've made very important interventions, and maybe learning from China, one of the budgetary reforms that we see is their transition towards a cashless society. And without, of course, moving in that direction, you have a large informal sector that will continue to thrive. They will remain an incentive not to corporatize and not to operate under the formal regime, which will be a disincentive for people who register and do the work, So with this, let me first of all thank the advocacy unit for hosting us today, the teams who produced SDPI's first response document last night, as well as the 4 panelists, Dr. Abid Suleri, Dr. Fariha, Dr. Sajid, Dr. Khalid, as well as colleagues around the table who appeared on media last evening and will continue to do so today as well once the provincial budgets are unveiled. So, and of course, colleagues who made their interventions online, we are extremely grateful to them. Thank you.